Final Exam, an Avatar The Last Airbender fanfiction. Chapter 18.
Two pairs of Yuyan departed first, acting as a vanguard. The Water Tribe siblings shuffled in their wake, herded by a short Yuyan woman. The remaining two picked up the rear. Shiori pretended to not pay attention. As expected, they were leaving her in the company of the injured Chun. As he watched them wistfully, she kept her head down, as she would have had she been sent to Headmaster Zoran's office. The Yuyan turned out to be pretty reasonable captors. They had allowed Shiori and the other two bathroom breaks and had even fed them a little before moving the siblings out. Shiori's hands were still bound, her legs still hobbled, but instead of being tightly tied together, a short length of rope allowed her a limited range of movement of her appendages. They probably trusted her to behave herself, and under other circumstances, she might have considered it. But now she was ready to do whatever it took to succeed in her mission. The sun had just finished painting the sky a multitude of colors. The golden light had reached high enough to begin filtering down through the thick foliage. The nighttime mist still clung to the ground, making the air chilly, so the small campfire in its welcome warmth had yet to be smothered for the day. Chun collapsed to the ground next to the campfire with a sort of graceful ease. The youngest and only trainee of the group, he was understandably frustrated at missing out on the action. All the better for Shiori to take advantage of, in her opinion. He glanced at her and winced.
That cheek must hurt something awful. What happened?
One of your comrades severed my bowstring while it was fully drawn. It was an excellent shot.
Hal Lee, probably. He excels at that.
Shiori frowned. She was trying to be on her best behavior, to lull Chun into complacency, but she also needed to steer the conversation onto the right path, which meant breaking the rule of silence. It was a calculated risk, but Chun seemed amiable enough to let it slide.
Which is your master?
Technically they all are, but Paola, the shorter woman, is my actual final instructor. She's firm, harder than Shiyun. I think she's disappointed in me. I broke my arm on the very first day.
Shiori nodded. She did not have to fake commiserating with him.
I understand. I believe I have caused my brother displeasure as well.
She let the silence settle for a few minutes. Inside, she was feeling the pressure of each passing second. Each beat of her heart was putting more and more distance between her and her objective.
Keisuke is... He's an excellent archer, but he has only newly been giving his black headband. He didn't skip a year. None of us have. Your presence here is... troublesome.
The girl sighed, pretending to be saddened by that.
My bow and quiver. Are they safe?
Of course. You're our little sister in arms, after all. We wouldn't destroy a fellow Yuyan's weapon.
Are you sure? Keisuke was pretty angry with me last night.
She made her voice small and uncertain, hiding the guilt and disgust she felt over her actions. Subterfuge seemed unworthy of a prospective Yuyan.
Whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
Sure, I'm sure. Want to see?
She nodded, curled up on herself, playing up on her small and helpless 14-year-old form. Her 16-year-old guard, hindered by his arm, rose a lot less gracefully than he had sat, moving towards one of the tents. Paola was about to be a lot more dissatisfied with her trainee. As soon as his back was turned, Shiori thrust her hands and legs to opposite sides of the fire, burning the short length of rope that bound them together. Spider monkey rope, although high in tensile strength and light in weight, was extremely vulnerable to fire. She kept her eyes on Chun's back as the ropes caught, the fire licking eagerly at the strands towards her vulnerable ankles and wrists. As he disappeared into the tent, she snapped her legs and arms apart, severing the weakened strands.
Hurry, hurry, hurry!
She swiftly rose to her feet, putting out the still burning rope before seizing a piece of firewood. Chun emerged from the tent as she began stalking towards it, his eyes widened comically, his mouth gasping out a startled, "Oh." Being Yuyan, he temporarily forgot about his sling, fumbling with his bow and quiver in an attempt to defend himself with a weapon he lived and breathed by. Shiori didn't hesitate. She charged the older boy, makeshift club drawn back. Chung belatedly realized that he could not make the bow work for him. He dropped it, turned, and ran. The agile girl closed the distance before he reached the tree line. A firm strike to the back of his head felled the boy, but unfortunately did not render him unconscious. He covered his head with his one good hand, body tense for another strike. The girl hesitated. unwilling to hit him from such a position of superiority while he cowered before her.
Surrender.
The younger archer had underestimated her opponent. As soon as she drew up short, he rolled at her, kicking out with his legs, hurling a rock hidden in his good hands. Caught unaware, Shiori stumbled backward, tripping over herself in an effort to reverse directions. As she fell, Chun's rock just missed her head. He scrambled towards her, attempting to use his larger size to pin her down. Shiori beat at him with her stick, but she had no leverage. In desperation, she scurried backward, crab-like, and then flipped in an effort to regain her feet. His good hand snagged her foot for a few desperate moments, tripping her up again, but she managed to squirm free. The chase reversed itself. Clumsily stumbling to her feet, Shiori dashed back into camp, her one-armed opponent only a pace or two behind her. She dove for her abandoned bow, rolled as she snagged an arrow, and ended up in a sitting position, with the arrow fully drawn and pointed at Chun, who froze, right arm brandishing the makeshift club she had dropped. They both remained like statues for a moment or two, only the harsh, ragged breathing breaking the silence. Then Chun, lowly, injured Chun, who could not have been more than 2 years her senior, curled his lip at her.
Your brother was right. You're not meant to be a Yuyan.
Shiori felt her anger flash in her eyes. Chun saw it too. His sneer faded as her bowstring twanged loudly. Her arrow took his ear clean off. The boy's hand dropped his club as he howled in pain, good hand rising in attempt to clamp it against the mangled, bloody remnants. It never made it there. Shiori's blunt-tipped arrow caught him right between the eyes. He crumpled instantly to the ground. The girl only hesitated a heartbeat before scrambling to her feet. Another arrow already drawn, she kicked at his motionless form, then danced a few steps back. Her heart thumped loudly in her ears. It was deafening, overwhelming. She felt vaguely sick. Was he dead? Had she killed him? She hadn't drawn the arrow fully back to compensate for the short range, but still, a strike with that amount of force behind it could kill someone. Hesitantly, she neared Chun's limp form once more, afraid that he'd move, afraid that he wouldn't. Shiori's nerves felt like they were on fire. She angled to the side, watching his chest intently. There! It slowly rose and fell. The trainee lived. Breathing out a sigh of relief, Shiori shook herself. This was no time to waver, no time to doubt. Swiftly, she gathered the rest of her scattered arrows and placed them into her quiver. She gave Chun one last look.
Who's not meant to be Yuyan now?
Gathering herself, she headed out in the same direction the others had taken. She would find her brother and his compatriots and prove once and for all that she was destined to join their ranks. Even if she had to carve her victory out of their hides, nothing else mattered. Shiori crept her way through the undergrowth with as much stealth as she was capable. Her red headband, her pride and joy, had been removed, tucked carefully away where its bright color would not attract attention. Her face and hands were purposefully coated in smears of mud. Her quiver remained covered. Shiori was sacrificing the second of time it would take to get her hand around the oilskin in order to hide the white fletching of her arrows. Thus far, her tactics had been successful. Possessing the advantage of surprise, she had already dropped 2 of the outer guards, felling them from their perches with blunted arrows. Whether or not they survived the fall, she did not know. The crashes of their limp bodies seemed deafening to her. She had vacated the vicinity as soon as she had completed her shots. Having been taught Yuyan's strategy, Shiori strongly suspected that the 7 archers would be surrounding the ambush zone in 2 loose-formed circles. The weaker archers would be in the outer circle, giving them a few precious seconds more to pick their shots. The inner circle would be comprised of the most experienced hunters, Kozu, Haoli, and Paola, Shiori assumed. Keisuke and the other taller women remained on the outer perimeter. The problem was, the younger trainee couldn't find them, and the more she moved around, the greater the risk of her own discovery. She eased her way into the hollow center of a thicket, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly to help decompress her strained nerves. Using the tip of her bow, she gently nudged a few of the leafy branches out of her line of sight. The place the Yuyan had chosen for their ambush was a saucer-shaped grassy field, similar but smaller than the one the Avatar's group had been camped in. She was closer than she liked to the area, far too close to be able to hunt the 2 remaining outer guards. She'd have to backtrack and continue to circle around in order to find her intended prey. The girl sighed, taking a moment to study the field before moving again. The boy and girl had either managed to free their hands or had for some reason been set completely free. A few red-fletched arrows protruded from the dirt near the edge of the field. Obviously, the two had tried to make a run for cover, only to be herded back by the threat of impending death. Now their energies were being exerted in an effort to dig a hole in the low spot of the grassy area. Shiori wasn't sure what exactly the purpose of that was, but they were certainly tackling the project with gusto, using a couple of flat rocks to aid them. They were already up to their elbows in the earth. She watched them labor, and then went back to scanning the surrounding area for any sign of her hidden brethren. An exclamation of success quickly hushed drew her attention back to the Water Tribe teens. The brother and sister exchanged grins, and the boy produced what appeared to be a strangely shaped white whistle. He took a deep breath and blew into it, but no sound emerged. Shiori frowned. After a moment's consideration, she crawled out of her hiding place. Reaching behind her, she flipped the oilskin out of the way. Something was going on. The air seemed thick with anticipation. Both blue-clad teens kept anxiously scanning the sky, though they were at least wise enough to keep crouched close to the ground, hovering around their hole.
Foolish.
They were probably planning to hide in there or something, as if the Yuyon would miss due to a small hole in the ground. She decided to ignore them. There were 5 Yuyons still hidden in the surrounding area, 5 master archers who were undoubtedly prepared to bring down the Avatar. She couldn't let it happen. A low, reverberating groan echoed through the forest. It vibrated through the center of her chest. Shiori's hand hovering above her quiver twitched. Across the field, was that movement? She stared at the suspect area intently, careful to hold herself still. If it was somebody, then they would be able to spot her as well. The wind shifted direction suddenly. The trees off to the west bent downwards as if buffeted from above. The errant wind swirled around the grassy depression, swaying the obscuring foliage just enough for her to see. It was movement. Hao Li, unless she missed her guess. Of course, he would be closest. His interleg hindered his ability to shift positions quickly. Shiori was sorely tempted to return his V-shaped arrow to him, but practicality won out. While capable of severing rope, a bowstring was still a bit out of her league. She pulled another blunted arrow, drawing it back to her aching cheek in one smooth motion. His attention remained riveted skyward. The wind shifted direction again. The cry from the 2 pieces of bait heralded the arrival of the Avatar's furry beast. Shiori released. Her arrow screamed across the clearing, catching Hao Li right between the eyes. He staggered before falling half in and half out of the brush he had been hiding in. The Water Tribe girl gave a little eep of surprise. A huge wash of winds whipped the foliage in all directions. The large, 6-legged beast, first scorched black on one side of its body, touched down, and all chaos broke loose. A bevy of red-fletched arrows immediately filled the air, raining down on the center of the field. The blue-clad girl threw up her arms. A splash of water emerged from forming an ice shield to protect her and her brother. Limited by the lack of water, her improvised protection wasn't very big or strong, though. The arrows that struck it cracked its surface. It was apparent it wasn't going to last long. The sky bison bore the brunt of the Yuyon's offensive. Fortunately for it, its thick, shaggy layer of fur seemed to keep the arrows from penetrating too deeply. It gave a bellow of rage, turning so its beaver-like tail faced the direction of the assault.
All one way. The arrows are only coming from one direction.
Shiori's eyes widened as she saw the trap her brethren had laid. Then there was no time for thought. She gave up on the idea of staying hidden and scrambled to get clear of the bison's blast. The beast's tail rose and fell. Air screamed in the opposite direction. The unnatural gale pummeled the vegetation. Leaves fell like rain to the ground. Shiori, lucky enough to be off to the side of the 6-legged monster, was spared the worst of the blast. She kept moving, kept encircling the field. If she was right, the Avatar would be coming from this direction, taking advantage of the artificial opening in the Yuyon circle.
Katara, Sokka, you're all right.
The boy soared into view right on cue, a small flying lemur trailing in his wake. In another time and place, the young archer might have marveled at the feat, but now she kept her attention on the forest he was flying over. The arrows came as she knew they would. 2 trailed rope. They struck the wood on the Avatar's glider and almost immediately tightened. The orange glider came to an abrupt halt. The young monk, obeying the laws of momentum, tumbled forward. Without his glider, he could no longer fly, but he directed a blast of air downward, slowing his fall. One of the hidden archers took advantage of his target's momentary disorientation. A lone arrow flew directly towards the monk's bald skull. Another arrow, this one fletched in white, intercepted it. A wave of elation sweeping through her, Shiori couldn't help but grin widely as her arrow knocked the other one off course. It was a miraculous, instinctive shot. She had never before hit anything that small moving that fast. But there was no time to celebrate. Other red-fletched arrows followed in its wake, more than she could possibly hope to counter. Thankfully, the Avatar reacted to the danger. A sphere of swirling air surrounded him, deflecting all the missiles. They fell to the ground, which was beginning to look like a pincushion. One nearly clipped Sokka.
Hey!
The Water Tribe boy was attempting to reclaim his weapons from the still motionless form of Howlee.
Sokka, come on!
Climbing to the top of the angry shifting beast, the girl pulled out arrows from his hide as she went. The Yuyan changed tactics. Arrows trailing rope arched through the air. They were attempting to pin the sky bison down. Many of the arrows arched up and over the bison, burying themselves deep within the ground. A few stuck into the bison's large saddle. The ropes tightened as more followed in their flight path, creating both a net and a tethering system. The waterbender used her meager supply to deflect some of the missiles, but the lack of a steady supply of water hindered her efforts. Her brother had far more success simply chopping at the ropes with the sharp edge of his boomerang and clubbing the wood and arrows into splinters. Even the Avatar's long-eared pet joined in, using its teeth to gnaw through the strands. Shiori hesitated to assist in their efforts. While it was well within her capabilities to target the thin ropes, the problem wasn't too much the ropes themselves, but the archers releasing them. By her calculations, there were 4 Yuyan left, and they were all moving, shifting positions between each volley in their attempts to create a makeshift net. The girl felt the arrow shafts in her quiver, able to tell from the number of painted rings near the fletching what kind of arrowheads each possessed. She was in trouble. Only one blunted arrow left. The Avatar freed his glider from its tethers, twirling it around until it resembled a simple walking staff. The bison gave a roar of frustration, attracting the young monk's attention.
Appa!
He directed a blast of air towards the beast. It effectively knocked the encroaching arrows out of the sky, but passed harmlessly through the web of ropes already in place. The boy ran to join his friends, completely distracted from the fact that he was the Yuyan's ultimate target. Tempted, Shiori sighted down her last blunted arrow. She could take him. It would be easy, and across the way, a very familiar face mimed her action. She blinked, her eyes focusing on her half-hidden brother. Keisuke, her life, her light, her son. The tip of his arrow tracked the running child, his back tensed. He was ready to strike, waiting for the perfect shot. Shiori's arrow caught his left hand, the one holding his bow. The pain must have been excruciating, even for a fully trained Yuyan. His arrow went low, skipping across the ground, just missing the Avatar's feet and drawing the boy's notice.
Appa, yip yip!
He created another sphere of air. This one grew larger and larger. The swirling air currents buffeted the hidden archers from all sides. The constantly shifting air pressures made it hard to breathe. Shiori shielded her face from flying debris. Even the tiniest particles stung as the wind whipped through the forest with a hurricane's force. The sky bison groaned. Its flat tail added to the unnatural, powerful blasts of air. A few trees cracked and fell. Branches flew through the air, succumbing to the gale. Through squinted, watering eyes, Shiori saw the Water Tribe boy chopping through a few more ropes as he scrambled up to the bison's side. The hairy beast snapped the rest of them off upon takeoff. The orange-clad monk used his airbending to propel himself onto the saddle as the bison lifted off. The windstorm ended as abruptly as it began. The silence following the howling of wind was broken only by the bison's departing moan. Feeling wind-whipped and disoriented, Shiori rubbed grit out of her eyes and popped her ears in an attempt to restore her hearing. If she had possessed a lick of common sense, she would have run. Her cover was blown, literally. The Avatar's temporary hurricane had torn apart the brushy undergrowth that had been concealing her presence. Not that it mattered anymore. They knew where she was. Keisuke's blunt-tipped arrow returned the favor as she had bestowed upon him, striking her left hand. Her bow flew out of limp fingers. She turned dull eyes towards him, forced a tight smile, and tilted her chin ever so slightly into the air.
I did it, Master Zorn. I passed your test. I faced off not only against a group of fully trained Yuyan, but my brother as well. And I stayed true to my orders. Does that mean I'm a weapon now?
Shiori knew in her heart that didn't matter. She was going to die here. Her body would probably never be found. Yet another casualty to the vigorous Symmetra Island training process. No one would care, not even her own brother. She heard them coming, her execution squad. None had been untouched by the Avatar's fury. They looked as disheveled as she felt. Some were worse off, clothes torn, bodies bleeding, eyes and faces grim as they approached her. Not all were present, evidence of her earlier success. The now conscious Howley gave her a look fierce enough to kill. No one spoke. She had already been given her warning, her chance to survive. There was nothing more for either side to say. Shiori felt oddly numb, disconnected from everything around her. The approaching Yuyan seemed to move in slow motion, like a dream.
Maybe I'm already dead.
The sun felt warm on her face. She forced her bruised and aching hand to find and remove her red headband from the pocket in her quiver. Suddenly, she felt like crying.
So close.
She had been so close to achieving her goal, to proving herself, to reuniting with her brother. And it had all gone up in flames. She wished that she had never stood out from the others, that she had never skipped a grade. But even so, with shaking hands, she tied her red headband around her forehead. It was all she had left as proof of how close she had come. Kozu was leaning toward his gathering archers, muttering something in their ears. One took off, apparently to search for the missing archers. A thought struck the girl. Maybe they weren't going to honor her with a swift death. Maybe they would just wound her, injure her enough to guarantee that her life would dribble out in a painful, prolonged ending. Fear shattered her odd sense of apathy. It twisted in her gut, forced her to tighten her muscles lest she start trembling from head to foot. The Yuyan did not come too close. They did not have to. A couple began freeing arrows from their quivers.
I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry.
Paola, short and fierce, gave her a measuring look.
Is Chun alive?
Shiori, no longer trusting her voice, nodded once. The woman nodded back and loosely knocked a red-fletched arrow. Kozu was the last to prepare his weapon. When he wordlessly drew his fletching back to his cheek, so too did the three others. Shiori stared at Keisuke but found nothing in his blank face to comfort her, so she closed her eyes. Her knees shook so hard she almost fell to the ground. With a hard swallow, the girl maintained her upright stance. If nothing else, she would die with pride, a Yuyan to the end. She heard them release, heard her death in the arrow's shrill keen, and then there was another sound, a familiar sort of roar. A wave of heat washed over her. Light pierced the darkness of her tightly closed eyes. She opened them to find herself cut off from the archers by a wall of brightly dancing flames. Metal arrowheads, their shafts incinerated, struck the ground around her. Stupefied, Shiori looked to her left, where a small group of firebenders were exiting the forest. And the one creating the life-saving barrier was none other than Prince Zuko himself.
Final Exam was written by Magnusrae. Avatar The Last Airbender is owned by Nickelodeon, Michael Dante DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko. The narrator for this story is Makeya Royer. The voice of Chun is Timothy Doorenbos. The voice of Shiori is Lexi Orta. The voice of Sokka is Hylian Knight 97. The voice of Katara is Jocelyn Bouwers. The voice of Aang is Makeya Royer. The voice of Paola is Rona Wilson. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.